Welcome, everybody, to another Amazon Tactics Tuesday for Brand Fortress. And today we're going to be talking about a topic that I think we have some really unique perspective on, which is, should I hire an Amazon agency? And the reason why I think we have a really unique perspective on this topic amongst the three of us is that I've been an owner of an Amazon agency for the last 5 years, and have seen the good, bad, and ugly that comes out of that. Matt has worked at a number of different Amazon agencies and also as a brand owner, so sees that perspective. And Mike, I know you've worked with a number of different Amazon agencies, as you've worked on building your brand. And so there really is, I think a lot of different perspectives on the different side of the table, both from the brand perspective and then also from the agency perspective on, when should I hire an agency? Should I hire an agency at all? What are the pros and cons? And how do you get the most out of that relationship? So I guess where do we want to start with this discussion, Mike? I know we talked a lot before we hit record, and you were talking about some of the challenges that you've had in the past with Amazon agencies that you've worked with. So is that a good place, you think, to start for this conversation?
Yeah, we can start there. I think the first thing that I suppose I would say is that um, it is definitely the case that you shouldn't just run into this willy nilly. It should be, you should really take some time to think about whether it makes sense to even walk down the road of hiring an agency in the first place. And part of that is determining what is your goal in hiring them. I think that's the first, and we can talk about that in a little bit. I think that's a good topic to discuss, but definitely you want to start there with what is the goal for hiring this particular agency and why. But if we get into kind of the nuts and bolts of just having done it and what my experience has been and kind of what my thoughts are on that, I would say one, our experience has not been amazing. We have hired, I think, 5 different agencies over the years for various different aspects of our Amazon business, maybe 6 actually. Um, and the one thing that I'm going to say this 2 different ways. 2 agencies, I think, if I'm being as objective as possible about the relationship, I think 2 of those agencies that we hired, one of them didn't have enough time to really, for us to really see whether they would have been a good fit for us, because we ended up having another opportunity come along that made more sense for us in the moment. At least we thought it did. And so we ended up switching gears. And so that really was not their fault. So they might have been terrific to work with. And they came highly recommended. The other agency that I think falls somewhat into that category is not so much that they didn't have time. We gave them plenty of time to be able to have significant positive impact on our account. But I think that it's also important to remember, and I think this is true of this agency, is that not every agency is right for every Amazon business.
100%.
I think what you sell, the category that you're in, and what their level of experience is with that, the price point that you sell at. Are you a super premium price product in your category, or are you the bargain basement price product in your category? Now, I hope you're not that. If you're watching this podcast, I hope you're aware that that's probably not your best bet to be the lowest priced individual in your category, unless it's a very strategic move for you to do so. But some agencies are better at dealing with premium products. Some agencies are better at dealing with low price products. Maybe there's the strategies that they're good at might work better for a low price product in a category than it does for a premium price product in a category. I actually think that the strategies that one of these agencies was employing for us was really more purpose built for a product that could be priced at the lower end of the category. Maybe not necessarily the lowest price, but certainly not a product like ours where we're priced 3 to 5 times as much as everybody else in the category. I just don't think that their strategy stack made sense for us. So that's the first thing, is just make sure, just understand not every agency is good for your business, even though they might be right for somebody else. And that probably means asking some questions on the front end in terms of, what other brands have you worked with that are similar to us? either similar category to us, similar product to us, similar price point by comparison to the rest of our category, that sort of thing. Get an idea of what is their strategy stack. Like what do they intend to do with your brand if you were to let them take things over. Really vet that ahead of time. And I didn't do a good job of that with this agency that I was just mentioning. They're good people. I liked working with them. They have a lot of integrity, and I kind of made an assumption that because all of those pieces were true, they would be able to do good work for us. And I do not have any question that they tried to do good work for us. It just wasn't a good fit for our brand. Beyond that, though, we've worked with a number of other agencies, and I will say, so far, I have not been impressed. And I won't ever name names because, again, sometimes it's a result of just they're not a good fit for your company or your brand or your category. So I'm not going to throw anybody under the bus, but it's been a difficult road, and I think a lot of it stems from agencies using inexpensive overseas freelancers, which I don't have a problem with, but they are not properly managing those freelancers and making sure that they're verifying the quality of the work before it gets implemented or before it gets submitted to the brand owner like myself. And so I end up doing a lot more work that really should be the agency's job. I end up doing the work of vetting, the work product of their freelancers. And if that's what I have to do, I might as well just hire the freelancer myself and bring them in, in-house. So that's been kind of our experience thus far at a high level. We can talk about details, but
Man, I know you've got a wealth of experience in this area as well. So, anything that you want to kind of build off of that Mike mentioned, or other perspectives that you think would be important for listeners to know?
Yeah, so I think the majority of our specific listeners are already established on Amazon. They're doing, mid six figures to seven figures. So it's not like they're the same advice that I would give to a brand new seller. Like I think that a brand new seller, I think there's a level of involvement that you need to have in the very beginning, specifically if we're talking about PPC. I think you need to get your hands dirty in the beginning. I think that you need to be very, very actively involved in the management and the setup of the initial campaign structure and that kind of stuff. I mean, the challenge when you go right out of the gate with an agency and you don't understand the basics of PPC is that you don't really understand reporting that you get. You don't know how to ask the right questions. So again, I think that the majority of our listeners are kind of established. So, I do have experience on both sides of the table. And I think from a seller, especially if it's your um, first time approaching an agency and trying to outsource in that way, like before I even attempted an actual agency, I hired freelancers and I tried to do it in-house. And I think that was an important step for me, is to understand also like the management of someone and what I wanted to hear and how involved I wanted to be in the process and what I wanted to be reported on. So I went that route first, and I think it prepared me for those conversations with an agency. Right out of the gate, the agency that I used it was mostly a tool. It was before AI was a thing. It was like a bid optimization tool that then had a managed service behind it. And the problem that I had with that particular entity is that it really didn't work. My product at the time wasn't like a garlic press or a barbecue glove that, I was competing against 100 other sellers selling the exact same thing. It was a little bit innovative. So, there wasn't as many keywords to dominate on as there were in a lot of other categories. And this particular tool was adding a lot of or irrelevant keywords to my campaigns, and it created a huge giant mess. And I don't think that, similar to what Mike was talking about, where a lot of the management, the pushing of the buttons and pulling the levers were done by overseas freelancers that I didn't really have that much communication with. And I really don't think understood my product or brand. And that was a huge challenge that took me, once I severed that relationship, it took me 6 months to unravel the mess that was created because of that. And I think one of my problems is that I went in thinking that this was going to be the opportunity for me to just wipe my hands of it and just get a report every week. And that wasn't the right solution for me. So that was my first experience. And, then I've evolved over the course of time as a seller. working with agencies that were not tool based and were more human based, and that was a much better experience. And I think what I learned out of the gate was, first of all, I think you have to be ready as a brand, especially if you're new to outsourcing to an agency. You're ready as a brand to really understand what is your superpower? What are the things that I enjoy doing? What are the things that might not be the best use of my time? And put those all in buckets, and then really understand what it is that you're outsourcing to an agency. There are PPC specific agencies, there are full service agencies, and it really just depends, and then everything in between. So it really just depends on what it is that you're looking to outsource, but you have to understand that going in, because if the salespeople are any good, which I've been in that role, by the way, for a couple of different agencies, if they're good, they're gonna sing a really interesting and a story that speaks of rainbows and butterflies at the end of it. But if you don't really understand what it is that their strengths are as an agency, and if that matches up with what you're looking to outsource, you're going to run into issues with alignment of vision and expectation alignment and things of that nature. So I think you have to really understand what it is that you're outsourcing, why you're outsourcing it, and then find an agency that matches exactly what your deficiencies are and what you're looking to outsource. I think that's a very important part of it.
Before you probably should jump in here, John, because you got a lot of info. But I do want to say something regarding what Matt just said that I think is kind of important, and probably something that I haven't paid enough attention to in the past. So as he mentioned, you've got agencies that are very specific to what they do. So say a PPC agency or a Google Ads agency or a whatever, and then you've got agencies that are more full service and do multiple different things. And I think one of the things that is important to be careful about is oftentimes I think agencies have a superpower and then they have a bunch of other ancillary services that they have now stacked around their superpower so that they can kind of fill out the boat a little bit. And they're not nearly as good at those fill-in services. And so if any of those fill-in services are ones that are crucial to your business, you probably don't want to just give them to them if you haven't determined that that's actually another superpower of theirs. If it's just a fill-in service, find somebody else if it's critical to your business. If it's just kind of, hey, it would be nice to have that, but it's not critically important, well, then maybe it makes sense if it's an inexpensive add-on, to that agency. But
yeah, I think so. I guess before I get too far down the rabbit hole, I completely agree. And just from an agency perspective, I can tell you one of the reasons, even though we've gotten a lot of requests and almost pressure from clients and prospects and stuff over the last couple of years, to get on a different platform. So Walmart was a good example where people are like, hey, why don't you start advertising Walmart? And I mean, we tested it out for a little bit and just realized that was going to be a different skill set. And we're at that part with TikTok right now. And quite frankly, the approach that we've taken is more of, we know good people that own agencies that do those things. Right. And we would much rather refer, a client to an agency who's really good at that than for us to try and be, all things to all people. Because there's enough happening on Amazon in order to, stay up with all the trends and everything that's going on with ads and creative and all that type of stuff that, we've got our hands full. Now, zooming out to kind of the 10,000 foot level, what I'll say from an agency perspective, having done this for 5 years now, is I would say the best clients we have is it's much more of a partnership than we're quote unquote doing everything for them. And the reason for that is because there's a lot of things that are happening around the brands that we're there to support. But we need to be a part of that process as far as, when are they launching new products? What is the brand strategy or even the product level strategy right now? Is it, hey, we want, profit optimization, in which case how we manage their, ads campaigns are going to be very, very different than if it's, hey, we want to take market share and we want to grow, top line revenue. And it's also, where do you fit into the marketplace? Because if you're a premium product, well, that tells me that, we might have some more flexibility with the price lever to where, it's very possible, and we were just talking about this before we hit record. We're working with a client right now, that we were able to significantly increase their price and increase their revenue at the same time. And that's kind of the dream, position to be in. But not every brand is set up for that, especially if they are designed to where they're not a premium product. That's not always the right fit. And so, really understanding it's not, yeah, you're delegating some of those day-to-day tasks of PPC and those types of things to that agency. But you're not deserting that entire channel to them, at least in order to be successful in what we're seeing from most of our clients. The other thing that I would say is that, and people that are listening to this, and I know, both Matt, you and Mike know that the Amazon platform has changed dramatically over the last, 4 to 5 years. It used to be significantly better, or I shouldn't say better, easier, really, when you start looking at, profitability and a lot of those other aspects as a business. It used to be a lot easier to build a profitable, product and a profitable brand and business off of Amazon. Still tons of opportunity on Amazon, but that looks very different. And so, I think the other thing is that really aligning what are your expectations with that agency. And I would say now, as we're recording this in 2025, if you have an agency that's just doing PPC, if your goal is just to, squeeze as much profit as you can out of your current product selection, that might work okay. But the reality of it is that, a lot of the progress that we see for brands right now is really around really solid PPC strategy, which a lot of brands now are doing well, and conversion and listing optimization, and making sure that you are getting as much visibility and as much as high a conversion rate as possible out of your listings. Because otherwise, if you're just trying to kind of adjust bid clicks or keyword bids in order to hit an ACoS goal, you really end up getting left behind, because your listings aren't converting as much. So therefore, you don't want to spend as much, and you have to spend less compared to your competitors in order to keep the same amount of market share. And before you know it, you've lost half your market share to either overseas competitors, which can be very aggressive, or, either competitors have been around for a long time that just kind of got smarter and invested in, optimizing their conversion rates. And then, the other things that we talk a lot about on the podcast a lot, which is building your brand off of Amazon, or at least having a customer list off of Amazon, and then having a strategy for building up the brand of launching new products, and looking at, how can you continue to expand as a brand. So what I would say is, if you're looking for an agency, look for an agency that understands your brand strategy, and that their skill set aligns really well with where you want to take the brand in the next, year to 3 years.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of good meat in there as far as like what that relationship looks like with an agency. And one thing I would say is, if you're going to bring on an agency, the one thing I've at least always tried to do as best I could is give them enough time to be able to
Yeah.
actually get to know the brand well enough and really get their feet under themselves to start delivering the results that they're capable of. Because you can't come in fresh to a brand that you don't know, especially if you're coming into a category that you haven't done before. So if you're an agency who's never done pool tools, or even the pool category at all, it takes a little time to get your feet under you. So you need to give a few months, probably at least 2 months, I would say, to give them an opportunity to get to know the category well enough and your brand well enough, and all the the proper keyword usage, and what your messaging is, and all of that, before you really start making any significant determinations about, do we continue with that agency. um, and so that's kind of an important piece. The other thing that you mentioned was just kind of that communication piece, and that is, so some of it probably comes down to, this is something I was thinking of as you were talking, John, was kind of that determination of, when to bring on an agency and who to bring on, what
Mhm.
aspects of your business might you want to bring on an agency for. And I think Matt said something really important earlier, which was that I don't know if this is always true, but it definitely is true, at least within the Amazon ecosystem is true. So in other words, like he was mentioning, don't bring on a PPC manager for your Amazon account if you don't already know at least the basics and the fundamentals of how Amazon PPC works and what the terminology means and what you should be looking at. What are the KPIs that you should be paying attention to, that sort of thing. If you don't know your category very well, and you don't understand PPC on Amazon, you shouldn't be pulling on an agency yet. Now, on the flip side of that, there may be things that are outside of the Amazon ecosystem that might be a lever that you should be pulling for your brand that you know nothing about, but that maybe you don't need to know a lot about. And maybe you can just kind of learn as you go. So, for instance, a good example of that would be TikTok. Um, there's a lot of expertise that goes with properly utilizing TikTok to push a brand. And also how to properly use it to push the brand also on Amazon. And if you don't know anything about TikTok, then waiting until you do to bring on somebody who actually knows what they're doing, especially if you can afford to pay them, is probably not the right move. Because the longer you wait, the more sales you're losing by not making use of TikTok if your brand is one that really fits that platform well. I don't think every brand does. I'm not saying that probably every brand can make use of TikTok to one degree or another, but we always have to make decisions about what levers we're going to pull and what levers we're not going to pull because we can't pull them all at the same time. And so whatever money, either time or money that you would potentially be investing in making TikTok work for your brand is time and money that is not being invested pulling some other lever, unless you have unlimited resources, which most of us don't. So, make sure that you're paying attention to that. What levers should you actually be pulling in your business? What are the next most relevant levers? Maybe they're the same levers, just pulled harder, right? Maybe you're already pulling the right levers and you don't have to step out and start doing something different. You just have to do more of what you're already doing. Like maybe you're really good at launching products. Well, if that's the case, launch a whole bunch more products. Like if that's your superpower is launching and you've got a really good community to launch to and you can really rank, maybe TikTok and all of these other things are not things that you should be focusing on. You don't need a new agency for something that you don't know. You just need to launch more products.
Yeah, I want to circle back to that concept of, if you're not very familiar with how, and I mean, we've talked quite a bit about ads, and I feel like ads is probably the most intimidating, if you will, of the topics, but there's other thing, listing optimization and that type of stuff that happens that's important as well. And if you're a brand owner out there and you're looking at an agency, what I would say is that it makes it a lot easier to find a good agency if you have a strong understanding of the fundamentals. Because then you're going to know, yes, of course, there's going to be agencies out there that will just take your money and do nothing. That's like any industry. But I think what happens more often is there's agencies that don't really fully understand what you're trying to do with your brand. And it's just there's just not that alignment of strategy.
Yeah.
And with that said, if you're someone who's like, hey, Amazon ads are really confusing for me, or I just don't have the time or whatever in order to put into that, what I would say is, first of all, I mean, we spend a lot of time on client education of making sure, they understand why we're tracking the numbers that we are, why we're optimizing for certain numbers, and how that aligns, and making sure that we understand what their brand strategy and brand goals are to make sure that, we're aligning all those different numbers to go in the direction that makes sense for their brand strategy. And then if you're getting any agency that you end up working with, there should be a very clear and easy for you to understand, and they should be helping you understand, what strategy they would implement and why. And the other thing that I would say is that, this is where community comes into. If you're talking to a couple of different agencies and you don't know which one to go with or whatever, talk to a couple of successful, brand owners on Amazon and say, "Hey, I talked to an agency and they say that they want to do this, and here's how, what they're kind of focusing on, to get that sanity check." Because if you don't have that background, that's where it's important to have friends, and how this is a team sport, and bringing in a mentor, or someone at your level, just to kind of sanity check the information that you're receiving from them. Because I'll say one of the things that I see agencies really push, that sounds really cool, but in the end is actually not very beneficial, is they'll say, "Oh, well, we're going to increase your ACOS and your profitability." Well, it's not very hard decrease your ACOS. It's not very hard to decrease your ACOS. But if I cut your sales in half and, decrease your ACOS by 10%, have I really made your brand better at the end of the day?
Right.
And I don't think so. And it's the same thing with, their quote unquote wasted ad spend. Well, if you're doing things right, there is going to be a percentage, and everybody wants to be a small percentage, but there's going to be a percentage of quote unquote wasted ad spend. If you cut that down to zero, what you're essentially saying is that you're not willing to test any sort of new keywords or anything else. And so you've pretty much said, "Hey, I have no interest in growing and competing on Amazon," which will make you a little bit more profitable in the short run, but will make you completely not competitive in the long run, and will hurt your brand over the long term. So those are just kind of the things that I see a lot used as levers that brand owners don't necessarily fully understand the long-term implications of things that sound cool, but in the long run might actually hurt your brand.
I think a lot of what we've talked about so far goes back to one thing that Mike mentioned. It talked about the relationship that you have with your agency. I've used agencies of all different sizes as a brand owner. I've worked at all different agency sizes as an employee, as a consultant. And what I would say, I think the most important role in an agency, both speaking with my agency hat on, but also speaking with my seller hat on. If I was a seller, looking at different agencies, the first thing that I would want to see is that there's a separation between managing PPC and managing the brand. I think that having someone that like a brand manager type level, or one of the agencies that I worked for that had was a bigger agency, so they had kind of middle management type tiers, but they're called their customer service manager or customer support or customer success manager, where you have a client facing person that is not pushing the buttons and pulling the levers inside of PPC campaigns, but is managing that person that's doing that. But then also looking at the brand overall, looking at conversion rate, looking at competitors, looking at different things that are happening in the market, understanding, keywords that are driving sales, and not just at a what's the bid level. Because you can use software to do that. So I think that having a brand manager that is client facing and is really fostering those relationships with brand owners. We were just talking about one of the brands that John and I work with. And we were able to increase her price by about 30%, but also at the same time increase sales. And a lot of that was a collaboration between her and I. Like, it wasn't just, "Hey, we're going to raise your price and we're going to drop money out of a helicopter with PPC ads." Like, there was a lot of strategy that went into, we had to fix their main image. We had to fix their SEO, on page SEO. Like, they weren't doing a great job in their title of calling out main keywords. So like, there was a lot that went into the result, but a lot of it was collaboration with the brand owner. And it wasn't just, I sent a report at the end of the month. It's, this is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. This is the effect that we expect it to have. And if it doesn't, this is how we're going to roll it back. So I really think that when you're looking at evaluating agencies, I think having there being some a level of separation from who's in spreadsheets all day and who's actually looking at the strategy of the brand at a high level. I feel like those have to be two separate people, and I feel like the brand strategist has to be the one that's having the communication with the client. Well, the other thing that we mentioned, as Mike has had experience with overseas freelancers, and feeling like you've been just handed this person that is using a software and is just adjusting an ACOS target inside of a tool. I think having someone who is very speaks the English language very well and understands how to foster relationships as opposed to just reading stats on a page. I think evaluating that piece of the process is important. And who will you be speaking to on a regular basis? What is the function of that person? And is there someone driving high level strategy as opposed to just pushing buttons inside of a PPC software?
Well, I think that's a great point too. Of what is the level of that person and what's the impact in the sense of, I mean, just to use our agency for example, we do have somebody who is overseas who does a lot of our catalog work, and she does a fantastic job. Now, with that said, there's a lot of uh, oversight that happens with that, and if something gets put into a catalog wrong, the chances of it costing a brand thousands of dollars or tens of thousands of dollars are a lot lower than when you start looking at PPC. So that's the other thing is that, I would really encourage, listeners out there when you're looking at hiring the agency of not only like, hey, who's going to be my brand manager, but give me a little bit of background on the PPC specialist that's going to be working on my account, because, they're going to be spending, thousands or tens of thousands of dollars a month for you. And even if that means you're finding someone who's 10% more effective just because, they understand the English language and they understand, American culture, well, that's an extra, be anywhere from, extra $1,000 a month or tens of $1,000s a month in, effectiveness that you have on your account. So, just again, one person's opinion, I really don't think it makes sense in order to skimp out on PPC specialists and people that are working on at least the ad side of your account, because I think really, yes, there are those diamonds in the rough that happen to be overseas and they're really smart people, but for every one of them there's 1,000 people that are somewhere between bad to okay / mediocre, and mediocre can cost you a lot of money on your account, especially if you're spending tens of thousands of dollars a month on Amazon ads.
Yeah, I think honestly, John, I think that's a really good point. Is and maybe that comes full circle back to that question of what things do you farm out to an agency first of all. So you probably need to evaluate is what is what is the what does the value of success look like if an agency does this right, whatever this thing is that you're looking to farm out, and also what is the degree of loss that you might experience if they do it wrong. And to some degree, I think that would probably establish for you kind of a baseline in terms of like, how comfortable am I bringing in an agency that I don't necessarily know, and how much vetting should I do beforehand to, before we give them the reins to start working on something. So that's something to think through. I would say one of the things that I wanted to mention on this is something that I think is one of those areas where, in my opinion, what I've experienced tells me that this is a red flag that you should be paying attention to from day one. And if this is something that you're dealing with from day one and it doesn't get rectified quickly, it's probably a sign that you need to move on. No matter what you think of the people who own the agency, no matter what you think of their ultimate goal and what they're trying to build out and how trustworthy you think they are, if this is happening, it probably means there's some sort of breakdown in their processes or their management structure or something, and you probably need to move on. And that is this. This is something that we've dealt with a number of agencies. It's something that at the moment we're dealing with the current agency, and it's making us question what we're going to do. And that is when simple mistakes are coming back to you, and you as the brand owner or some member of the team, the brand team, is having to work with that agency to correct those very simple mistakes that anybody that has a good command of the English language and has a few brain cells probably would know that's not right and it shouldn't have happened that way. If those things are regularly coming to you and aren't being caught by some manager on the agency team before it makes it to you, and you point it out and it doesn't get corrected fairly quickly, in my opinion, that's probably a sign that you need to decide whether to move on or not. Because my perspective is If they're going to use overseas freelancers, which again, I don't have any problem with that. There's certainly some good overseas freelancers, and I've used them, and I use some now. Um, but if you're going to do that as an agency, then you better have a strong management team that sits above them, between them
Yep.
and the client, that is vetting the work that they're putting out and making sure that the work that you're sending to the client is quality work, and that you're not causing them more work on the client side than is necessary. Like, how much are they paying you for your agency services, and how much work are you putting on their plate because you didn't take care of it as a manager? We're seeing some of that, that there's a lot of that kind of, I would say some attention to detail that's a little bit lacking on some of that stuff, and it's coming through to us, and we're having to spend time on it that we shouldn't have to. You need to make sure that that stuff either isn't happening or that it gets rectified quickly.
Yeah, two quick thoughts on that. I mean, one, what I would share is that if you're seeing simple mistakes like that, I 100% agree with you. I think that's a huge red flag, because I can tell you that if those simple mistakes are happening, there's bigger mistakes that are happening behind the scene. It's just like going into a restaurant, and if you happen to see that their tables are dirty, you probably don't want to know what's going on in the kitchen. Um, the other thing that I would say is that I wouldn't get super wrapped around that, because I think Mike, you and Matt, and I think all three of us kind of have a pretty good level head around, overseas, not versus overseas. But for the listeners out there,
Fair enough.
rather than thinking about, where are these people coming from, I would really focus on, what is the results that agency is delivering.
Yeah, for sure.
Because our focus is, hey, it doesn't really matter whether that person is, sitting next to me or halfway across the world. That shouldn't matter to the client.
Yeah.
What matters is the results that we are delivering. And that's where we've really been focused, is delivering those results for clients. And sometimes that looks like, increasing revenue while making, increasing, total average cost to sale, tacos numbers, and, or, making that go down, whatever it happens to be, or, amazing graphics for them. Those types of things in order to improve conversion rate on listings. But in that process, part of those results is when we send something over to a client, they shouldn't look at it and go, WTF, on this image, because then we have failed on delivering the results. And we're not perfect, but we do put a lot of effort into making sure that we are consistently delivering results for the clients that we have. And I think I also want to double click on something else that you said, which is, once you decide on that agency, well, and I would say even during that conversation process, if you have an agency that says, hey, we're going to double your sales or whatever it happens to be in 30 days, it's either one of two things. Either, they're just giving you the song and dance in order to get you to sign, and then it's probably going to be a disaster. Or there's something massively that you are missing in how you're running your business on Amazon. I would say 80% of the time it's you're being oversold a lot of results in order for, them to get you to sign. So if they say that they can, make massive improvements on your account in a couple of weeks, I would run the other way. Like, to me, that's a huge red flag of how good an agency is, where they're just over promising and they're going to way under deliver your expectations when you start working with them.
Yeah.
Do you have anything more you feel like you want to add to that, Matt?
No, I mean, I think that's a really really good way to say it. I think that what I loved about the process at a couple of the different agencies that I've worked at, from the other side of the table, is them doing a bit of an analysis. Now, getting an analysis on your account, you need to make sure that analysis isn't self-serving for the agency. Like John was mentioning, wasted ad spend. I worked for one that I didn't love the way that they portrayed wasted ad spend in the slide deck after the analysis that we did. It painted all wasted ad spend as an enemy of the brand, which John just mentioned. There has to be a certain level of testing going on at all times, testing new keywords, new ad types, stuff like that. But I think having an analysis done at the beginning, and that's more for a brand owner being able to just understand, what does the agency think that they can do for me? What are they seeing? What are our goals aligned? Having very aligned goals in the beginning and understanding their communication style and how you're going to be reported to, I think is also super important. But I think if they're doing an analysis and you really understand the strategy that they're going to implement to get you to where your goals are, whatever those goals are, understanding that and making sure that it aligns, and making sure that they're not blowing smoke. I mean, like John said, I think that would be a huge red flag if they said that they could move mountains that you haven't been able to move for yourself. So I think that's an important part of the process as well.
You know what I like in what you just said is in terms of like the audit. Um, I think that it's probably true that most agency that you might hire um, to assist with building your Amazon brand, there probably is some sort of an audit that they should and could do on your brand that can help establish what your baseline is and what they could do for you with whatever their service is. Whether it's creative or PPC or TikTok or social, whatever it is, they should be able to do an audit. And what I like about that idea is there's two things about that. One, I think that any audit that you get back, if you can't easily understand what it is that they're going to try to do with your brand that they think is going to improve things, then either one, they need to find a better way to explain it, and maybe a conversation with them, because there are some things that are technically complex, that might be difficult to explain in a document, an audit document. But somebody on the team ought to understand the strategy well enough that they can explain it in layman's terms to somebody who might not, right? If they can't do that, I personally think that probably is problematic in and of itself. You need to be able to understand what the strategy is they're going to employ. And if they can't explain it well enough to you, either one, it's gobbledygook, or two, they don't understand it well enough. Otherwise, they'd be able to explain it. So I think that's really a valuable piece, is to get that audit from whoever it is and make sure that you fully understand what that strategy looks like. And also that, quite frankly, you agree that that strategy can accomplish, or at least has the potential.
Oh, Mike was going to say something really important and he dropped.
What they're telling you.
There it is.
Please.
Mike, you dropped right as you said something really important. So you said, and also, and then all of a sudden it cut out, and our listeners were like, that was the piece that I needed to hear. So if you could repeat that.
Well, so I'm not sure where the also came in, but my point was that so they need to be able to explain it to you, but also you, in terms of that relationship with the agency, if you don't understand the strategy and believe that that strategy can actually accomplish what they're saying they can accomplish, then you already have a problem at the front end of this thing. You don't want to hire this agency if either A, you don't understand the strategy, or B, you don't believe it can actually do what they say, because then it's kind of going to be this adversarial thing.
Yep.
Where it's like you're always going to be butting heads, like, hey, we're not moving fast enough, or, because you don't believe for yourself that strategy can actually work. Like there's a level of disbelief there. So make sure you understand it and that they can explain it to you properly, and that you believe that strategy makes sense for your brand.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think we've given listeners a lot to think about. I will wrap up with this one last tip, and then I'd love to hear any last tips from you guys, which is anytime you're getting, every agency has case studies and testimonials, which are great. I would highly encourage listeners to look at the dates on those case studies and testimonials, because they age like milk, especially with Amazon. Just because an agency was super successful in 2019 does not mean that they know how to grow a brand in 2025. They are completely different skills. So just make sure that you pay attention to that when you get those case studies and testimonials. And with that, I'll turn it over to you guys. Any last tips for our listeners before we wrap up for today?
One tip that I will give that I actually very much disliked as a sales rep for agencies is when a brand owner asked to speak to someone on the team, like a person, the type of a person that they would be interacting with on a weekly basis or a monthly basis. I didn't love that as a sales rep because it put me farther away from getting a contract signed. But from a brand owner feeling comfortable with the agency that you're going to be working with, I think it's a valid question. And I think for me, to give me a warm fuzzy and really believe that I think that the agency can do what I'm asking them to do, I think making sure that you gel with the person that you would be having a conversation with on a regular basis is a really important thing to ask the agency. If they don't do that, I would be a little bit leery. There are some agencies out there that are still kind of owner operator, and that's understandable. And I think that to me would even give me a little bit more of a warm fuzzy that I'm speaking with the guy that his livelihood is directly tied to how well they do with my brand. So I think speaking to someone as opposed to just listening to a sales pitch, I think talking to someone that actually manages brands, I think that's a good step in the vetting process.
And I think I've talked plenty, so I don't really have much to add.
All right. Well, I think we've definitely given listeners plenty to think about as they think about hiring an Amazon agency. And so thank everybody for listening, and we'll see you next time on another Tactics Tuesday.